Okay, so we're going to take a look at overhead welding. Again, for the details on getting started, go back to the video on welding horizontal fillets with 7018. It's very, very long, but again, it covers everything. I'm going to assume at this point that you've got that baseline information. The only real difference between welding overhead and welding horizontal or flat are the angles. Don't be afraid of welding over your head. The weld is not going to drop into your lap. It's going to stay up there. Arc length is important, that you keep it short, and arc blow means that the spatter will fall down, and inevitably you may have your hands in the path of the weld. But ultimately, I'm not going to have the rod straight up and down, or at a 45-degree angle when I'm welding overhead. It's going to be only a little bit off that vertical axis, maybe 30 degrees max, and angled back maybe 15, 20 degrees. You can't get away with the bigger heavy drag angles that you could on the horizontal or flat position. I'm running the same amperage that I was running on flat or horizontal for the most part. I think right now I'm on 126 amps, and I'm simply going to strike the arc off the top plate. Remember, gravity is working against you here, so you've got to keep that bead up. It will want to burn to the lower plate, so you may have to manipulate the puddle a little bit, but for the most part it's just like welding in the downhand position. So we're going to give her a go and see what we come up with. I can already see that my camera is so far in my way that I can't weld past it. So, all right, here we go. I can get my angles a little better right now. I'm looking a little more over the camera instead of through it. So we're gonna strike an arc and get started. Again, I'm right-handed, so I'm gonna weld from left to right. I am really positioned directly in front of it. I have almost the same view the camera has. It's just I'm a little bit above it, and that's about what you want. So you want to watch that slag as it drips behind you, and you want to try to keep your arms and your hands away from that path.
Pay close attention to the arc. Occasionally it'll favor the lower plate, and I'll very briefly move the rod up the top plate to correct the direction that the arc is headed. If you don't do that, eventually the rod will burn to the lower plate and it won't go to the top plate at all. It's something that you kind of do without really thinking about it after a while, of course.
Again, just a nice, slow, steady feed inward. Burn the rods down to the numbers, just like you did before. Allow the slag to cool before chipping it off. It's still glowing a little bit red right there. I've got these little grapes dripping down. I want that for a quarter-inch fillet weld, for example. I should have that little build up of slag periodically, and then the slag should come off relatively easily. And I'm shaking my camera because of the way that it's mounted, but so there's my first overhead bead, and I'm going to continue to weld and reposition the camera, go all the way across this plate. Striking the arc and restarting is just like it was on the flat. I'm going to kind of swing around, make a little loop. Only I'm going to come from the top, then down. So again, if you go back to the horizontal video, you'll see that when I struck my arc, I'm going to strike the arc right on the end of that weld. I'll get my flashlight in the shadows here. I'm going to strike the arc right on the end of this weld. I'm going to come back and make a loop and then in. okay? The slag will want to bridge the gap between the plate and the arc, and it may be easier to stick the rod on the overhead. It's just something that you're going to have to get accustomed to. You'll get it in time, okay? Usually right after I say something like that, I do it myself, so we'll see if that doesn't just happen here. So I get a little arc flow right there. I'm a little bit in my own way, again with the camera in my hands, the armrest. The camera's mounted to the armrest underneath my setup, and I'm leaning into that with my abdomen. So I don't have anything to stabilize my hands with. When you're first learning, you want to stabilize your arm, your elbow, something. And of course, when you're welding, you want to do that as much as possible. It'll just make a better weld. But again, we want to keep that arc length reasonably short and minimize that drag angle. So again, I'm at 126 amps. Now as I get near the end of this plate, my ground, you can see the tip of the chipping hammer right up the top of the camera. That's my C-clamp mount. So as I get past that mount, it's going to have a tendency to maybe give me a little bit of magnetic arc blow. Whoops, strobe, don't need that. So again, there's another look at the second leg of this bead, and I'm going to continue this off and then we'll wire brush it up. Still running the same amperage. Now to combat that arc blow, and I'm going to anticipate getting it, I'm just going to change my rod angle into more of a push as I get near the end of the plate. So I'm going to go from about here to maybe, a little more square up. I have to really concentrate on not getting ahead of the puddle. I will cover myself in molten steel and slag. So there we have it. First overhead fillet. So I'm going to back up the camera, tighten this clamp, and find my flashlight. So there's the first bead. This flashlight's a little bit bright for what I'm doing here, but there's the overhead weld. Okay, uniform and cross section. Okay, on this second layer, I'm going to work from the bottom up. That's just how I was taught. There's no reason at all that you can't put the top pass down second, and maybe on this video I'll do half of it one way and half of it the other. There are circumstances where you end up putting these beads in out of sequence. An example of that would be, welding a multi-pass around a pipe or a square tube, in which case, your sequence gets messed up. So that first pass I'm going to put on the bottom. Now again, I'm extending that lower leg of the weld just like I did in other positions. And I'm covering up most of the previous pass. I'll stop right there. I'm a little beyond halfway. I got a weird sense of vertigo while I was doing that. That was really bizarre. So it'll tend to look a little funky while you're doing it. It's one of those like taking on faith things that it's going to come out right. And I think that's why some people put the top pass down first. It looks a little more normal, if you will. We're going to go ahead and put the top pass down, and then I will extend that top pass beyond this point all the way to the end, and ultimately we'll put the bottom pass on the last half, and we'll compare the two methods. So top pass. Now again, I'm trying to extend the upper leg out and again bridge the weld so it blends in between the two passes. I'm going to stop right there. I would say that, you know, for welding with stick electrode, and I guess this goes with other processes as well. Let's say that 1/8 inch is a nominal sized electrode. For flux core, maybe 0.45 is a nominal sized electrode, or MIG. When you go to larger electrodes, resist the temptation to put much larger passes down. Just travel farther with an individual pass. All right, here we go. So on that overhead pass, if it's done in the, you know, traditional sequence, welding from the bottom up, and that's typically how you would weld most anything, is from the bottom up. You know, you could tell if something was welded overhead or horizontal just by looking at it, even if it's out of position when you look. But that is not always the case. There is no reason why the bottom pass has to be put down first. And let's go off camera for a second. I'll see if I can explain that, and then I'll weld the rest of this in the reverse sequence. All right, so sometimes when you're welding, you end up with work that ends up being done out of sequence. So as an example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the traditional methods that we've already looked at. Single pass weld is already in place. 2F is horizontal, 3F is vertical. This is looking straight down on top of the weld. And then 4F is overhead. So my second pass would typically be on the bottom, right here, and of course on the bottom on the overhead. On the vertical, it could be either the left or the right. It doesn't make any difference. I'm right-handed, so when I'm welding, I tend to have my hand is here, the rod is pointed that way, my eyes look in from this side, so I like to weld towards me first. But if I'm in an awkward position, I may do it backwards. It makes no actual difference. Third pass would typically be on the top, okay? And then here again, of course, if it's on the left, it would be on the right. And again, we worked from the bottom and we went up to the top. The rule is that progression should generally be up, okay? And we want to work from the bottom up when we're welding, with very few exceptions. So that is the traditional method. Now, that will fall apart if you're welding something like a square tube or a pipe in the horizontal position. So let's take a peek. With a square tube or a pipe, because we're going around the part, things tend to go crazy. So I've already got the first pass, the red bead drawn in on both of these examples, although I've only got the joints the same as we looked at just a moment ago on the left-hand side, but this would be the same case in either way. If I start with the overhead in the traditional method and I put that second bead on the bottom, that bead would be here, okay, on the bottom. And again, on the pipe, it would be here. If I progress around this and I continue to go this direction, so I'm headed up, and I'll do the same thing on the pipe. My general progression is up. Hopefully my head's not in the way of this video. You'll notice that by the time I get to the top of the square tube or the pipe, my bead is now up above. Okay, it is not on the bottom where I would typically have a horizontal. In this case, I'm only going to draw the right-hand side, but the same would be true over here. My bead is now on the right side of my vertical. So the issue arises when I get to the top, and that's always going to be the case. My bead is now, quote unquote, out of sequence. So if I then come in and put my last pass down, and again, I'm going to progress generally up. Now there are exceptions. Pulse arc welding with MIG, you can go vertical down. I know there's some guys that do vertical down beads on pipe, but again, you don't run into this situation on a pipe joint. You only run into this when the pipe is welded to a bulkhead. So this is actually collectively, this whole assembly would be a position 5F, okay? It's not horizontal, it's not vertical, it's not overhead, it's a combination of the three, so it's position 5F. But if I go ahead and put my last bead down and I start on the overhead like I traditionally would with pass number 3, my bead is now here, okay? By the time I get up to the vertical, it is on the left side, okay? Of course, it would be on the right side over here. This would be reversed on the other side of the joint. But again, I'm only going to draw it on one side because it's already confusing enough. So here I am on the left side of the joint. When I get to the top, I'm now on the bottom, okay? And I'm going to try to bring that up. So I've now put my third pass in out of sequence. So my bead sequence was, again, red was 1, blue was 2, green was 3. Okay, and that is the traditional sequence that we looked at just a moment ago. In terms of the vertical, it doesn't really matter that they're done, again, 1, 2, 3. It doesn't matter left or right because they're beside one another. It's not a slag trap issue or anything else. On the flat, in this case, the very top or the horizontal, they're actually done differently. And I'll try to write this with my left hand. That's 1. This was pass. I want to write this backwards. I can't even do it. I always write backwards left-handed. Sorry. 2. And then the third pass was done down here. So that is not an issue. It's not something to get concerned about. I would say that as a general rule, overhead welding is where this comes into play. You having to really make that decision. Do I want to do the overhead bead first, or do I want to do the bottom bead first? And then after that, do you want to progress top down? So if I continue to put passes on here, again, would I go top, down, 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 so on and so forth, as I got multiple layers, or would I work from the bottom up? I guess that's a decision you're going to have to make, or, you know, check the company where you're working for and see if they have a weld procedure that deals with that. What is their personal preference? At BIW, it's from the bottom up. But again, when you get on a, you know, attachment on a bulkhead, if you continue the pattern all the way around unbroken, it gets messed up. And it is what it is, okay? Let's go back and look at that last section on the overhead. All right, now that we're back in the booth, let's look at this in practice. I'll just say that this is it is so ingrained in me to weld from the bottom up that I really struggle to do this in this manner, but it does happen naturally when you're welding in the 5F position. So here we go. Now for this first inch, it's kind of normal. And now we're going into weird territory for me. The same thing would happen in the downhand position, horizontal. I didn't demonstrate that, but you'll figure it out. Ah, shoot, my whole rig moved. Hopefully I'm still on camera. Looks like we're still on camera. Yeah. So here we go. Strip the slag off. Now this looks weird to me. And for some of you, this is going to look normal. This is how you've been taught. It's definitely not how I was taught. Okay. But you know, it's a decent looking bead. It's just backwards of what I'm accustomed to seeing. But that doesn't make it wrong. You can actually, you know, when you come up around that 5F position, you can cross over at the 3 or the 9 o'clock position and reverse it so it stays normal, but that seems a little bit overkill. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put that last pass on now. We are on the bottom. All right, let's clean this thing up and see what we got. Gravity's still on. Try that again. All right, so there are the two overhead welds on the left edge here, what we're looking at now. This was welded in the, I'm going to use air quotes, traditional manner, bottom up. And then we there's a transition in the middle, so kind of ignore that. And then the last of it was welded top down. You know, both of these beads are decent. You know, I'm going to say that the left side's better looking than the right because I'm more practiced at doing it that way. But it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong, although I teach my students to do it this way right here, work from the bottom up. I just think it's it's the right way to go in 99% of the instances that you're actually welding. But that is overhead fillets, and again, I could put another layer, again, bottom up 3 passes, or top down 3 passes, then 4 over that, 5 over that, until you have the size weld that you need.